What Genghis Khan did to the world cannot be undone. Let us begin with a number that does not feel real. 13 million. That is how many people share a single male ancestor who lived 800 years ago in the steppes of Mongolia. Not through legend, not through mythology, but through the cold evidence of Y chromosome haplogroups. That ancestor is Temujin, son of Yasugai, who would take the name Genghis Khan. 13 million living men, scattered from China to Central Asia, to the Middle East to Europe, carry a piece of his blood. Their bodies remember what history books cannot forget. That is the first thing that cannot be undone. Not the cities burned, or the rivers boiled, or the pyramids of skulls, though those are real enough, but the simple biological fact that one man rewrote the human genome of an entire continent. You cannot put that back. You cannot unfather a million sons. But the genome is only the smallest thread in a tapestry of permanence. What Genghis Khan did to the world is not a question of what he destroyed. Destroying is easy. Every warlord before him had burned a city, slaughtered a garrison, taken 1,000 women. What Genghis Khan did was different. He did not just break things. He rearranged the pieces into a shape the world had never seen, and that shape has never fully gone away. He took the isolated civilizations of Eurasia, China with its paper and silk, Persia with its astronomy and poetry, the Islamic caliphates with their algebra and medicine, the Christian kingdoms with their cathedrals and crusades, and he smashed the walls between them. He did it with blood. He did it with fear. But he did it. And after he did it, the world was no longer a collection of separate stories. It became one story. A single, brutal, interconnected story that we are still living inside. Before Genghis Khan, most people on Earth did not know that anyone else existed beyond their valley, their river, their mountain range. A farmer in Ukraine had never heard of a city called Baghdad. A scholar in Samarkand had no idea that people in Korea made porcelain. A monk in Tibet could not have imagined a forest in Germany. The world was not global. It was 1,000 tiny planets, each spinning in its own orbit, each convinced that its sun was the only sun. Then came the Mongols, and the Mongols came from nowhere. That is one of the most terrifying things about them, from the perspective of the settled civilizations they conquered. The Mongols did not emerge from a great empire with a long history of art and philosophy. They did not send ambassadors announcing their arrival. They simply appeared one day over the horizon, riding horses that seemed to be made of wind, shooting arrows that could pierce armor from a distance that seemed like magic. They had no cities to destroy because they had no cities. They had no farms to burn because they did not need farms. They drank the blood of their horses when water ran out. They could ride for days without stopping, swapping horses from their enormous herds, sleeping in the saddle, covering distances that European armies thought would take months in a matter of weeks. They were not an army. They were a weather system, a drought of blood, a plague of hooves. And at the center of this weather system was a man who had been born clutching a blood clot in his fist, according to the legend. And with Genghis Khan, the legend is always trying to catch up to the reality. Temujin was not born to power. His father, Yasugai, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, poisoned by Tatars when Temujin was 9 years old. The tribe abandoned the family. They left Temujin, his mother Hoelin, and his siblings to die on the steppe. And they almost did. They ate roots and rodents. They survived on the milk of a single mare. Temujin killed his older half-brother Bektar, over a fish and a lark, a dispute about survival, about who would eat and who would starve. That was his first killing. It was not a battle. It was not glory. It was a boy, maybe 12 years old, drawing a bow on his own blood because the alternative was watching his mother and younger brothers waste away. That is the origin of the man who would become the greatest conqueror in history. Not a throne, not an army, a fish. From that beginning, Temujin did something that no steppe leader had ever done before. He did not just defeat his enemies, he absorbed them. The traditional pattern on the Mongolian steppe was endless cycles of raiding and revenge. A clan would rise, dominate for a generation, then fall apart when its leader died. The sons would fight over the scraps, the tribe would fragment, and the pattern would begin again. Temujin broke that pattern. When he defeated a tribe, the Merkids, the Naimans, the Tatars, the Karites, he did not just kill their warriors and take their women. That would have been normal. That would have been expected. What he did instead was offer a choice. Join me. Not as slaves, not as vassals, but as brothers. He broke down the old tribal identities and reorganized everyone into new military units that owed loyalty not to their clan, but to him personally. A Tatar warrior who had killed Temujin's father ended up as one of his most trusted generals. A Merkit archer who had once tried to murder him became a commander of 10,000. This was not mercy, it was strategy. It was the most radical military reorganization in history up to that point, because it solved the central problem of steppe warfare: how to keep an army together after the battle was won. Temujin's answer was simple: give them a reason to stay. Not fear, not plunder, belonging. By 1206, he had united all the Mongol tribes. At a great assembly on the banks of the Onan River, the shamans and chieftains declared him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He was 44 years old. He had spent 3 decades climbing from an abandoned child to the master of 1,000,000 square miles of grassland. And then he did not stop. That is the key to understanding what he did to the world. He could have stopped. He had everything a steppe leader could want: horses, cattle, wives, territory, prestige. But Genghis Khan did not see himself as a steppe leader. He saw himself as the instrument of the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the Mongols. And the eternal blue sky had given him a mandate: the entire world. Not part of it, not some of it, all of it. So he turned south, toward the Jin Empire of northern China. The Jin had ruled over parts of China for more than a century. They had walls, they had siege engines, they had an army of hundreds of thousands. The Mongols had never taken a walled city in their history. They did not know how, but Genghis Khan learned. He captured Chinese engineers, tortured the knowledge out of them if necessary, and built an entire corps of siege specialists. He did not care about the morality of using captured enemies to kill their own people. He cared about results, and the results were devastating. City after city fell. The Mongols would surround a fortress, cut off its supply lines, launch thousands of arrows over the walls day and night so that no one could sleep, then roll up with battering rams and catapults built from the trees of the very forests they had just burned. The Jin army crumbled. The Jin emperor led his capital. By 1215, Beijing was in Mongol hands. The Mongols sacked it for days. They burned palaces, looted treasuries, killed scholars, and carried away artisans by the thousands. But here is the thing that cannot be undone. They did not just destroy, they also extracted. The Mongols took Chinese bureaucrats and put them to work administering the new empire. They took Chinese metal workers and put them to work forging weapons. They took Chinese doctors and put them to work keeping the great Khan alive. Genghis Khan did not want to wipe out civilization. He wanted to own it. Then he turned west. The Khwarezmian Empire ruled Central Asia and Persia. Its Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, controlled a vast territory stretching from Afghanistan to the Caspian Sea. He was wealthy, powerful, and arrogant. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan of 500 camels loaded with gold, silver, silk, and furs. A trade mission, not an invasion. He wanted commerce. He wanted to open the Silk Road. The governor of Otrar, a Khwarezmian city, saw the caravan, saw the wealth, and decided to take it. He killed the merchants, stole the goods, and sent a false report to the Shah. The Shah, perhaps believing his governor, perhaps simply indifferent, did nothing to punish him. Genghis Khan sent 3 ambassadors to demand justice. The Shah killed one of them and sent the other 2 back with their beards shaved, the ultimate insult. Genghis Khan climbed a mountain. He prayed for 3 days. He spoke to the eternal blue sky. Then he came down, and he did something that the world had never seen before and has never seen since. He mobilized his entire nation. Every man from 15 to 70 who could ride a horse and draw a bow was conscripted. The Mongol army that marched west in 1219 was not a raiding party or an expeditionary force. It was the entire population of Mongolia on wheels. The war against the Khwarezmian Empire lasted 3 years. By the end of it, the empire was gone, not weakened, not diminished, gone. The Mongols did not just defeat the Khwarezmian army, they uncreated the entire civilization that had supported it. They took the cities of Otrar, Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur, Herat, Merv, and 100 others, and they erased them from the map. At Bukhara, one of the great centers of Islamic learning, Genghis Khan rode his horse into the main mosque and ordered the scholars to feed his animals. He told them that he was the punishment of God. He told them that if they had not committed such great sins, God would not have sent him to punish them. Then he burned the city. At Nishapur, the Mongols killed everyone. Not most people, everyone. Men, women, children, cats, dogs, livestock. The population of Nishapur before the siege was somewhere around 150,000 to 200,000. After the siege, a chronicler wrote that not a single living thing moved within the city walls. At Merv, the Mongols counted the dead by assigning each soldier a quota. They killed so many people that the ground shook when you walked on it because of the bodies underneath. The Persian historian Juvaini, writing a generation later, said that the Mongols burned the library of Merv, which had been one of the great libraries of the Islamic world, and the smoke from the burning books darkened the sky for days. And then there's the story of the Khwarezmian Shah. He ran. He fled from city to city, ahead of the Mongol advance, always one step away from capture. He died on a small island in the Caspian Sea, alone of pleurisy. The Mongols hunted down his sons and his generals and his family. They did not stop until every vestige of the Khwarezmian ruling house was dead or in chains. That is what Genghis Khan did to anyone who crossed him. He did not make examples of them. He made them into examples. The difference is that an example implies there is something left to learn from. Genghis Khan left nothing. He left ashes. He left bones. He left stories that mothers would tell their children for 1,000 years. Do not cross the Mongols. Those stories, those generational trauma memories, are still alive today. You can feel them in the collective unconscious of every culture that faced the horde. That is something else that cannot be undone. But here is where the story becomes strange and difficult and uncomfortable for anyone who wants to see the world in simple terms of good and evil. Because after Genghis Khan destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, he did not leave Central Asia empty. He filled it back up with something new. He established a system of roads and way stations called the Yam. It was the first intercontinental postal system. A message could travel from one end of the empire to the other, from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea, a distance of 6,000 miles, in less than 2 weeks. That speed had never been achieved before. It would not be achieved again until the telegraph. The Mongols built bridges. They dug wells. They established standard weights and measures. They guaranteed the safety of merchants and travelers along the entire length of the Silk Road. A woman could walk from Beijing to Baghdad with a gold plate on her head, and no one would touch her. That was the boast of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, and it was largely true. For the first time in history, the entirety of the Eurasian landmass was united under a single authority that had a direct economic interest in keeping trade routes open. The result was an explosion of commerce, technology, and ideas. Chinese gunpowder traveled west. Persian astronomy traveled east. Indian mathematics reached Europe. The very concept of zero, which would make modern mathematics possible, made its way from India to the Middle East to Europe, along Mongol-protected roads. The Renaissance, if you want to trace its deepest roots, begins with the Mongols. The flowering of European art and science in the 15th and 16th centuries would not have been possible without the transfer of knowledge that the Mongols enabled in the 13th and 14th centuries. That is not speculation. That is historical consensus. And it is something else that cannot be undone. You cannot un-invent gunpowder. You cannot unteach algebra. You cannot un-exchange the genetic and intellectual inheritance of an entire hemisphere. Genghis Khan died in August 1227. The circumstances are murky. Some say he fell from a horse. Some say he was wounded in battle. Some say a Tangut princess, taken as a wife after the conquest of the Western Shire, castrated him with a hidden knife during their wedding night, and he died of the wound. The Mongols themselves kept his death secret for weeks while they finished the campaign. His body was returned to Mongolia, buried somewhere in the Khenti Mountains, and soldiers who carried him to his grave were killed to keep the location secret. 2,000 horsemen trampled the earth over his tomb so that no trace would remain. Then the horsemen were killed. Then the horsemen who killed the horsemen were killed. The world does not know where Genghis Khan is buried. That is the final act of control from a man who understood better than anyone that the power is not just about what you do while you are alive. It is about what people believe after you are gone. An empty grave is a form of immortality. The Mongols built a mausoleum for him, but it is a cenotaph. His real body has never been found. And in that absence, he becomes legend. But the legend is not the point. The point is that after Genghis Khan died, his empire did not die with him. That had never happened before. Every great conqueror before him, Alexander, Caesar, Attila, Charlemagne, had seen their empires fragment within a generation. Their successors could not hold the territory. The personal loyalty that had bound the army together died with the leader. Genghis Khan solved that problem. He created an imperial administration that did not depend on his personal charisma. He appointed governors. He established laws. He set up a system of succession that, while far from perfect, provided a framework for continuity. His sons and grandsons would go on to conquer even more territory than he had. Ogedei, his third son, finished the destruction of the Jin dynasty and pushed into Korea and Eastern Europe. Batu, his grandson, sacked Kiev and crushed the armies of Poland and Hungary at the Battle of Mohi. Hulegu, another grandson, burned Baghdad in 1258 and killed the last Abbasid caliph by rolling him in a carpet and trampling him with horses, because the Mongols believed that spilling royal blood would anger the earth. So they found other ways. By 1260, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, from the Siberian forests to the Persian Gulf. It was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. It would never be surpassed. And that size is not just a fact. It is a transformation. The Mongol Empire did not just cover territory, it connected territory. For the first time, the civilizations of China, India, Persia, the Arab world, and Europe were in regular, sustained contact with each other. Merchants traveled the entire length of the empire. Ambassadors crossed continents. Missionaries carried their gods to foreign lands. Artists and architects and engineers moved from one end of the world to the other, stealing ideas, copying techniques, remaking the built environment in new ways. The Mongols themselves were the greatest borrowers in history. They had no culture of their own, in the sense that settled civilizations understood culture. They had no literature, no architecture, no painting, no music that they considered worth preserving. But they recognized value when they saw it, and they took it. They took Chinese printing, and Persian astronomy, and Uyghur script, and Nestorian Christianity, and Tibetan Buddhism, and Islamic law, and Jewish medicine, and European armor, and Indian mathematics. They took everything, they mixed it all together, and they spread it back out across the entire continent. The Mongol Empire was not a culture. It was a machine for moving culture around. That machine has never been turned off. The globalized world we live in today, with its instant communication, its international supply chains, its mixing of traditions and languages and genes, is the distant descendant of the Pax Mongolica. Genghis Khan did not invent globalization, but he built the first working prototype. So, what did Genghis Khan do to the world that cannot be undone? Let us count the ways. He destroyed entire civilizations. The Khwarezmian Empire is gone. The Jin dynasty of northern China never recovered. The Tangut people, who had their own language and writing system, were systematically exterminated. The Mongols hunted down every Tangut who could read or write, burned every Tangut book, and scattered the surviving population so thoroughly that today the Tangut language is known only from a few inscriptions and a single bilingual dictionary recovered from a cave. That is not a metaphor. That is a genocide. It happened, and it cannot be undone. He created new peoples. The Mughals of India, who built the Taj Mahal, were descended from Genghis Khan's second son, Chagatai. The Timurids of Central Asia, who produced the astronomer King Ulugh Beg, were descended from Genghis Khan's generals. The Ilkhanids of Persia, who sponsored the great historian Rashid al-Din, were his grandson, Hulegu's dynasty. The Yuan dynasty of China, which Marco Polo served, was founded by his grandson Kublai Khan. Millions of people today from Turkey to Korea, carry Mongol ancestry. The genetic legacy of the Mongol conquests is written in the DNA of half the human race. You cannot unwrite DNA. He rewired the political map of Eurasia. Before the Mongols, Russia was a collection of quarreling principalities centered on Kiev. After the Mongols, Russia became a tributary state of the Golden Horde for more than 2 centuries. When the Mongols finally withdrew, the center of power had shifted from Kiev to Moscow, the city that had been most effective at collaborating with the Mongol overlords. Modern Russia, with its centralized autocratic government, its suspicion of the West, its willingness to accept suffering as the price of security, was shaped in the crucible of the Mongol occupation. You cannot uncreate Russia. He changed the nature of warfare. The Mongols did not invent the feigned retreat, the encirclement, or the horse archer, but they perfected these techniques and combined them with a level of organization and discipline that the world had never seen. The Mongol army was not a mob. It was a machine. Each soldier carried his own equipment. Each unit had standardized command structures. The famous Mongol ponies were not trained for battle. They were trained to survive on almost no food or water, to cover enormous distances, to operate independently of supply lines. The Mongols could fight in winter. They could fight in summer. They could fight in deserts and mountains and forests. They had a communication system using flags and drums and smoke signals that kept the entire army coordinated over hundreds of miles. Western armies, when they first encountered the Mongols in the 1240s, thought they were fighting barbarians. They were fighting the most technologically advanced military force on the planet. And, after the Mongols, warfare was never the same. Every European army that adopted gunpowder and drilled formations and centralized logistics was, whether they knew it or not, learning the lessons that the Mongols had taught. He changed religion. This is a strange one, but it matters. Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist. He believed in the eternal blue sky, but he did not impose his beliefs on anyone. He told his sons to respect all religions. He exempted religious leaders from taxation. He guaranteed the protection of Buddhist monasteries, Muslim mosques, Christian churches, and Taoist temples. This was not tolerance as we understand it today. It was pragmatism. The Mongols were too few to rule their empire by force alone. They needed the cooperation of the religious authorities who controlled the loyalties of the settled populations. So, they gave those authorities what they wanted: respect, protection, and autonomy. The result was a religious environment that was, by the standards of the 13th century, astonishingly open. Buddhist monks debated Muslim scholars in the court of the Great Khan. Nestorian Christians served as administrators in China. Tibetan lamas advised Mongol princes. This religious pluralism did not last. The Mongols themselves eventually converted to Islam, to Buddhism, to Christianity in various branches of the empire. But the precedent was set. The idea that a ruler could protect multiple religions, that faith was not a matter of state policy, that tolerance was a practical virtue rather than a weakness. These ideas entered the political vocabulary of Eurasia through the Mongol Empire. They are still with us. He changed the environment. This is the most overlooked legacy of all. When the Mongols conquered vast territories, they depopulated entire regions. The population of northern China fell by an estimated 40% between 1200 and 1300. The population of Iran fell by perhaps 70%. That many people dying did not just end human lives. It ended agriculture. Fields returned to forest. Pasture land reverted to steppe. carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere actually dropped during the Mongol conquests because so much farmland was abandoned and so many trees grew back. That carbon dioxide drop, measured in ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, is one of the clearest signatures of human activity on the global climate before the Industrial Revolution. Genghis Khan, entirely by accident, caused global cooling. You cannot uncool the planet. But the deepest thing that cannot be undone is the simplest. Genghis Khan changed the way human beings think about possibility. Before him, there were limits. After him, there were not. He showed that a single man, born with nothing, could rise to rule the world. He showed that no wall was high enough, no army strong enough, no empire permanent enough. He showed that everything could be broken. He showed that everything could be remade. That knowledge cannot be taken back. It is in our bones. It is why, when we look at the horizon, we wonder what is on the other side. It is why we dream of conquest, of exploration, of discovery. It is why we cannot stop pushing. Genghis Khan is not the only source of that restlessness, but he is the most powerful example. He is the proof of concept. And every empire builder since, every Napoleon, every Hitler, every American president who saw a manifest destiny, has been standing on the shoulders of the man from the steppes.